Hello. I'm going to start by giving you an introduction to my speech. This speech is about women in politics. There are a number of names I want to give you. Sanna Marin, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, and Ruth Davidson. Those are all female politicians, and I'll tell you in the speech exactly who they are. I'm going to mention Jo Cox too. She was a British MP who was murdered in 2016. I'll also mention Crooked Hillary, which is how Donald Trump refers to Hillary Clinton. And lastly, I'll mention Al-Qaeda, which I imagine you're all familiar with. Now I'm going to get started. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've been following the news recently, you could be forgiven for thinking that women in politics are doing pretty well, at least here in Europe. Germany's Chancellor is a woman. Belgium's interim Prime Minister is a woman. Denmark and Finland both have female Prime Ministers. Finland, in fact, doesn't just have a female Prime Minister, it has the world's youngest Prime Minister. Sanna Marin is 34 years old. The UK and Romania have also, in the recent past, had female Prime Ministers. Here at EU level, Ursula von der Leyen is the first female President of the European Commission. Her College of Commissioners is made up of 11 women and 15 men. That's the most gender-balanced commission we've ever had, if I'm correct. In the US, meanwhile, Hillary Clinton ran for the presidency in 2016. And there are already a number of women, including Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris, running for the Democratic nomination for the presidency in 2020. As I've said then, you could be forgiven for thinking that women in politics are doing pretty well. But that is sadly not really the case. The headlines about female prime ministers, female commissioners, and female candidates for the US presidency notwithstanding, the truth is that worldwide, women are still underrepresented in politics. In this speech, I'm going to look at some of the reasons why this is the case, and I will provide some figures that demonstrate just how underrepresented women are in the political arena. I believe we need to go back to the beginning to figure out why women are underrepresented in politics. By going back to the beginning, what I mean is that in most countries, women couldn't even vote until the last years of the 19th century or the early years of the 20th. World War I and its aftermath was a key factor in women in many European countries being given the right to vote. But even then, in some countries, there were still restrictions. It was often the case, for example, that women could initially only vote in local or municipal elections and only later got the right to vote in national elections. There were other kinds of restrictions too. In Ireland, for example, voting rights were given to some women in 1918, when Ireland was still part of the United Kingdom. Women could only vote if they were over the age of 30 and were property owners. It was not until 1922, when Ireland became an independent state, that all women were given the right to vote in national elections. Women in Britain had to wait until 1928, and women in France until 1945. More recently, it was only in 2015 that women in Saudi Arabia were finally allowed to run and vote in municipal elections for the first time. Clearly then, all over the world, women were excluded from the world of politics in its most basic form, the right to vote. They were excluded for a long time, and it's going to take a long time to catch up with men in this respect. But there are other reasons too why women are underrepresented in politics. Some people would say women are underrepresented because they're just not interested in politics. They don't have the same interest in politics as men do, and they therefore don't put themselves forward in the political arena. Ladies and gentlemen, let me nail my colours to the mast here. Let me be very clear. I think the argument that women just aren't as interested in politics as men are is absolute nonsense. Of course women are as interested in politics as men are. Of course they're as capable in the political arena as men are. The difference is the political arena is just not conducive to women's participation in it. Now, what do I mean by that? It's not conducive to women's participation. Well, firstly, politics is a pretty family-unfriendly arena. That's true for both men and women, of course, but let's be honest here. Gender norms mean that in most households, women are still the primary caregivers. It is women who have children, and it is women, for the most part, who are the primary caregivers to those children. They may even also take care of older relatives. That means that being able to strike a work-life balance is very important for working women, for all working women. Unfortunately, politics makes it hard to strike this balance. The family-unfriendly working hours and conditions associated with a career in politics make it very difficult for women in politics to meet both their political responsibilities and their family responsibilities. These difficulties were highlighted in August 2019 by Ruth Davidson when she resigned as Scottish Tory leader. She cited both the conflict she felt over Brexit, but also a desire to spend more time with her partner and her newborn son as the reasons for her resignation. She said that she could not justify spending so much time away from her child, and that in the past she had spent too much time away from her loved ones. This was not a mistake she wanted to make with her son. Ms. Davidson was widely praised for her honesty, but there was very little commentary in the media about the difficulty women in politics face in trying to strike that work-life balance. I believe that this difficulty is part of a vicious circle for women in the political arena. Not enough women put themselves forward for election because they feel their work-life balance will suffer. If women aren't putting themselves forward, that means there aren't enough women to vote for. And if there aren't enough women to vote for, not enough women will get elected. And if not enough women get elected, then politics will never change. And the same barriers that women face today will still exist in 20 years' time. How then can we break this vicious circle? Can it even be broken? I believe it can, but I also believe that there is another significant factor that keeps women out of politics. For me, this is a particularly worrying development. It is the extraordinary level of aggression that women who do enter politics have to deal with. When I hear the inflammatory language used in political debate, when I read the sexist abuse directed at female politicians, when I scroll through the threatening, demeaning, aggressive comments made on social media about female politicians, there's only one question going around my head, and that is, why would any woman want to enter politics? Politics in the 21st century is an arena where women are harassed. They are demeaned. They are shouted at in the street. They are sent aggressive, hate-filled emails. Worse, threats are made against them and against their loved ones. And sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, those threats are carried out and women pay with their lives. I want to mention Jo Cox here, a British MP who was murdered in June 2016, just before the Brexit referendum. I want to reflect on her case for a moment. The murder of an MP, male or female, is thankfully a relatively rare event. Jo Cox was a young woman. She was only 41 when she died, and she was the mother of 2 small children. Her killer was a right-wing extremist who apparently shouted "Britain first" as he killed her. How disturbing was it then to hear Boris Johnson not just use inflammatory language in the House of Commons in September 2019, but also dismiss the concerns of other MPs about his inflammatory language. These other MPs reminded Mr Johnson about Cox's murder and called on him to use moderate language in Brexit debates. I'm not going to go into detail on Boris Johnson's response, but he basically dismissed the concerns of these MPs and didn't moderate his own language. A young woman had been murdered, and the Prime Minister continues to use inflammatory language. I just don't understand that. Of course, I shouldn't be completely surprised by this attitude, because President Trump has also been inflammatory about female politicians in the US. He used to call for the shooting of crooked Hillary, as he called her. Yes, you heard that right. The President of the United States called for a political rival to be shot. That's the language he used. He also verbally attacked 4 Democratic congresswomen, accusing them, among other things, of hating America and sympathising with Al-Qaeda. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a problem here when the President of the United States thinks it's acceptable to speak about female politicians in this way. The problem is, firstly, that this kind of language can lead to these individual women being targeted for abuse. After all, if the President does it, that gives other people permission to do it too, right? But there's a larger problem here too. That's that this type of language, this kind of attitude, these things contribute to a culture in which women's voices are not welcomed. They are not respected. Now, if you know you are going into an environment where your voice is not welcomed and not respected, why would you bother? Why would you bother? I think many women are deciding not to bother, and they are staying out of politics as a result. But to what extent are women staying out of politics? Let me give you a few figures to demonstrate how poorly women are represented in politics. Worldwide, only 25% of members of parliament are women. Only 18% of ministers are women. In the European Parliament, only 36% of the MEPs are women. The women I mentioned at the beginning of my speech, Sanna Marin in Finland, Ursula von der Leyen here in Brussels, and the others I mentioned, they are all the exception to the rule. It's wonderful to see these women coming through into leadership positions, but we cannot be complacent because they are still very much in the minority. Ladies and gentlemen, change will not be easy, but I remain optimistic. I will finish by reminding you that the UN's Sustainable Development Goal number 5 specifically addresses gender inequality. There is a recognition there that we cannot continue as we are, not just in politics, but in other spheres as well. We cannot continue to exclude 50% of the population from decision-making. I believe very firmly that change will come. It may come slowly, and it may come in stops and starts, but come it will. And when it does come, it will have been worth the wait. Thank you.